I decided to come out here to escape everything. The stress of work, the endless buzzing of notifications, the constant feeling of being pulled in 100 directions at once. The cabin was always a safe haven, tucked away deep in the woods, miles from anyone or anything. As a kid, I spent summers here with my parents, running through the forest and playing in the creek. Back then, it felt alive with memories, but now, stepping inside, it's different, quieter, a little too quiet. The first few hours were perfect, though. No phone, no emails, just the sound of the trees swaying outside, the soft creaks of the wooden floors beneath my feet. Felt like the isolation I needed. I settled in, letting the silence soak in. Then, just as I was getting ready for bed, I heard it, a faint tapping on the window. I shrugged it off, probably just the wind or a branch. But as I lay there, the sound came again. Top, top, top. Slow, deliberate. I told myself it was nothing, but it lingered, like a whisper in the back of my mind. The next night, the tapping came back. This time, it was louder, more deliberate. Top, top, top. Like someone or something was outside, trying to get my attention. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and stared at the window. I knew I had to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, expecting to find a branch or something hitting the glass. But there were no trees anywhere near the window. Nothing could have been making that noise. The air was still, the woods eerily quiet. Too quiet. I stood there for a few minutes, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing. I told myself it was all in my head. Just the wind, I thought. Maybe I was hearing things. But the next morning, I noticed something strange. A cup I'd left on the kitchen table had moved. Just an inch, but I could tell. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe I had nudged it without realizing. But then other things started feeling off. The blanket on the couch wasn't where I'd left it. A drawer I hadn't opened was slightly ajar. It was subtle, so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. But that uneasy feeling stayed with me, creeping into my mind, refusing to leave. Later that day, I went for a walk down one of the old trails behind the cabin. It was nice to get some air, but as I turned back toward the cabin, I noticed something in the mud. Footprints. They led toward the cabin door but stopped just a few feet short. I froze, my stomach tightening. I hadn't seen anyone, and no one should have been out here. The prints looked old, weathered by rain, so I told myself they were from an old hiker, maybe years ago. But deep down, I knew that didn't feel right. On the fourth night, the tapping became relentless. It wasn't just tapping anymore. It was pounding, heavy and forceful, like fists hammering against the glass. Top, top, top. Bang. My heart raced as I sat up, drenched in sweat, staring at the windows. The cabin felt different, darker, like the walls were closing in around me. I felt it now, there was someone out there, watching, waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the flashlight and stormed through the cabin, flicking lights on, checking every corner, every shadow. Nothing. There was no one outside, no branches, no wind, just silence. But I couldn't shake the feeling, like eyes were on me, hidden in the dark. In a panic, I thought about the attic. I hadn't checked it since I arrived, and a sickening thought began to creep into my mind. My gut told me to leave it alone, but something else, curiosity or fear, pushed me toward the ladder. My hands shook as I climbed up, the flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. As the light swept across the attic, my stomach dropped. There, in the corner, were clear signs of life. An old sleeping bag, food wrappers, empty water bottles. and a notebook. Someone had been living up here, watching me. The realization hit like a cold wave. They'd been here the entire time, right above me, listening, observing. Just as I was about to back down, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, creaking through the floor below me. They weren't hiding anymore. Whoever had been living here knew that I had found their hiding spot. I stood frozen, every muscle tense, as the sound of those footsteps drew closer. My mind raced. I was trapped. The only way out was down through the same trapdoor, but the footsteps were getting closer. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to think, but it was impossible. My heartbeat was too loud, drowning out everything else. Whoever was down there knew I was up here, and they weren't in a hurry. They were taking their time. Each slow, creaking footstep echoed through the cabin, like they were savoring the moment. I glanced around the attic, looking for anything I could use. A weapon, a place to hide, but it was empty, just the remnants of someone's makeshift life. I backed away from the trapdoor, keeping my eyes on it, knowing there was nowhere to go. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence. I held my breath, listening, waiting. Nothing. The cabin was still. My mind screamed at me to run. But where? I couldn't stay here. Slowly, I inched toward the trapdoor, trying to be as quiet as possible. If I could just get down quickly, maybe I could make it to the door. But as I reached for the handle, the trapdoor creaked open, just a fraction, but enough to freeze me in place. I didn't move, couldn't. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. In the pitch-black silence, the only thing I heard was breathing. Not mine. Slow, steady breathing from just below the opening. And then, in a voice I barely recognized as my own, I whispered, "I was never alone. I never should have come here. The cabin was supposed to be a safe place, far from everything, far from them. I didn't have a choice. After what happened earlier, I had to hide. At first, it seemed empty, untouched for years. The smell of old wood and dust hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I was trying to calm down, to think. But then I heard it. Footsteps, faint at first, but unmistakable. Someone was in the cabin. I panicked, searching for any way out, and that's when I saw the trapdoor in the floor, hidden beneath a threadbare rug. Without thinking, I pulled it open, revealing a dark, cramped attic above. I didn't want to go up there, God, no, but the footsteps were getting closer. I scrambled up, forcing the trapdoor shut behind me. I crouched in the suffocating darkness, my heart hammering in my chest. The air up here was stale, the space so tight I could barely move. Down below, the slow, deliberate footsteps crept closer, and I realized I was trapped. And whoever was inside, they knew I was here. I pressed my back against the attic wall, forcing myself to stay still. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, and I tried to muffle it with my hand. I could hear them now, those footsteps. They weren't rushed, not panicked like mine had been. They were slow, too slow. Each step felt deliberate, like whoever was down there knew I was listening, knew I was trapped. I strained my ears, trying to make out any other sounds, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat, pounding so hard in my chest I thought it would give me away. I needed to calm down, but the more I tried, the louder it seemed to get. The attic was barely a room, just a crawl space above the cabin. In the dim light that filtered through the cracks in the wood, I could make out an old mattress, the springs exposed and rusting, and some tattered blankets piled in the corner. Whoever had lived here once had left in a hurry. felt like a place that had been abandoned a long time ago, and now I was part of it, trapped like the ghost of whoever had come before me. The footsteps stopped. I froze, my body tensing so hard it hurt. Silence. Then, a floorboard creaked directly beneath me. They were right below the trapdoor. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if that would make it all go away, but I could feel it, the presence. I couldn't see them, but I could feel their eyes on me, feel them standing just below, waiting, listening. My heart pounded in my ears, the sound of it filling the silence. I tried to stay calm, but every instinct was screaming. I wasn't alone. I never had been. The silence was unbearable, pressing down on me like a weight. I strained to hear any sound, any hint of movement, but there was nothing, not even a creak from the floorboards below. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had they left? Were they still there, just waiting? The tension was suffocating. My body locked in place, muscles screaming for me to move, to run. But where? Then it came. Faint creak. The trapdoor shifted, just a fraction, but enough to send a jolt of terror through me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The gap was small, barely wide enough to see through, but it was enough to know. Someone was down there. Someone who had been waiting, just as I had. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Then, from below, the sound of breathing. Slow, steady, measured. It wasn't frantic or panicked like mine had been. It was calm, like they were in control, like they had all the time in the world. I felt a cold sweat break across my skin. My mind spiraled, trying to rationalize, trying to find an explanation, but nothing made sense. Why weren't they moving? Why weren't they coming up? It was like they wanted me to feel this, like they were enjoying it. I could barely breathe, my chest tight with fear, every second dragging out, the sound of that controlled breathing filling the space between us. I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't about escape anymore. This was something else, something worse. I reached for the trapdoor handle, my hand shaking violently. If I could just close it, if I could just shut them out, maybe I'd still have a chance. But before I could, I heard my own voice, soft and broken, whispering from my lips. I was never alone. The words hit me like ice. They had always known. From the moment I entered this cabin, they'd been here, waiting, watching. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I stared at the trapdoor, my breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. The breathing below had stopped, but the oppressive stillness was somehow worse. My hand hovered over the handle, trembling. I couldn't stay here. Every part of me screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. I had to move. Suddenly, with a groan of old wood, the trapdoor swung open. It didn't slam, didn't creak slowly. It just swung wide and deliberate. Below, there was nothing but darkness. No figure, no sound, just black, yawning emptiness. I couldn't tell if that was better or worse. The attic was suffocating now, the air so thick with dread that I could barely think. I knew I couldn't stay up here, but descending into the darkness felt like walking into a nightmare. My body wouldn't respond, paralyzed by the terror that had gripped me since the moment I'd hidden in this cursed place. But the fear of staying was stronger. I swallowed hard, inching toward the opening, forcing myself to move even though every nerve screamed for me to stop. Slowly, I lowered one foot onto the first rung of the ladder, creaked under my weight. I waited, heart hammering, but nothing happened. I kept going, step by agonizing step, down into the waiting darkness. My foot hit something soft. I froze. Slowly, I glanced down. It was too dark to see, but it felt like cloth. An old shirt, maybe, or a shoe. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. And then I felt it. An icy grip wrapped around my ankle, cold and firm, pulling tight. I gasped, my body seizing in terror. I tried to jerk away, but the grip only tightened, pulling harder, dragging me down into the dark. And then nothing.
After the breakup, I figured a weekend alone in my apartment would be exactly what I needed. Just me, some takeout, maybe a couple movies, and a chance to clear my head. It was supposed to be peaceful, but instead the quiet felt suffocating. It was like the walls were closing in on me, and no matter how many distractions I threw at myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then there was Mr. Harris. He lived across the hall, a strange, quiet man I barely knew. I'd only seen him a handful of times, usually standing by his window, staring at nothing. Or so I thought. One afternoon I glanced over and saw him again, just standing there watching. His eyes seemed to lock onto me, but I told myself it was nothing. I mean, after everything I'd been through, who wouldn't be paranoid? It was just my imagination running wild. Right? But as the weekend went on, that feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. It wasn't long before things started getting weird. Little things at first. I'd lock my front door before bed, only to find it slightly open in the morning. At first, I thought maybe I just hadn't pulled it shut all the way. Simple mistake, right? But then it happened again. And again. My keys and phone started disappearing too. I'd leave them on the kitchen counter, only to find them on the coffee table or the bathroom sink. I chalked it up to stress. After the breakup, I wasn't exactly myself. My mind was all over the place. So, I told myself I was just being careless, distracted. But then one night it got worse. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard it. Faint scratching, like something moving inside the walls. At first, I thought it was a mouse or some other small animal. This building was old. That wouldn't have surprised me. But the sound didn't stop. It would come and go, sometimes louder, sometimes softer. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was nothing, but the longer I listened, the more I realized. It wasn't just scratching. There were whispers. Faint, almost impossible to hear, but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, but I couldn't make out the words. I told myself it had to be the neighbors, but it felt too close. Wrong. Suddenly, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being watched from across the hall. It was like someone or something was right there inside the walls watching my every move. I started locking every door, double-checking windows, but it didn't help. The feeling only grew stronger. That night, the scratching was louder than ever. It wasn't just faint noises in the walls anymore. It was right behind my bedroom closet. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was causing it. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened the closet door. At first, everything seemed normal. Clothes hanging neatly, shoes scattered on the floor. But the scratching continued, echoing through the walls like something was clawing its way closer. I moved my clothes aside, and that's when I saw it. In the back of the closet, behind an old shoebox, there was a small, barely noticeable door, like something out of a nightmare. My hands were shaking as I pulled it open. It led to a narrow crawl space, dark and cramped, with just enough room for someone to slide through. The air inside was stale, thick with dust, and the smell of something old and rotting hit me immediately. shining the flashlight into the space, my breath caught in my throat. There, scattered on the floor, were crumpled photographs of me. Dozens of them. They showed me doing the most mundane things, brushing my hair, eating dinner, even sleeping. And in every single one, I was completely unaware. Felt sick. These pictures weren't taken from inside my apartment. They were taken from inside the walls. Whoever had been watching me had access to my life in ways I couldn't even imagine. And all the evidence pointed to Mr. Harris, my reclusive, quiet neighbor who had been staring at me from his window. I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to confront him to find out how long he'd been spying on me, but when I rushed to his apartment, it was silent. No sign of him at all. I stood outside Mr. Harris's door, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked hard. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, almost desperate. Still nothing. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Fear had taken over, and I couldn't shake the image of those photographs, of him watching me, spying on me from inside the walls. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I grabbed the door handle and, to my surprise, it turned easily in my hand. The door creaked open. The apartment was empty. Not just quiet or dark, but completely abandoned. Dust covered every surface, thick enough to suggest that no one had lived there for years. The furniture was old and untouched, as if frozen in time. There was a musty smell, the air stale and cold. I walked through the small living room, my footsteps echoing eerily. How could this be? I'd just seen him. He was here watching me, spying on me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. None of it made sense. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I heard it. Faint, barely audible. A whisper. Name. June. I froze, my blood running cold. The voice was soft, raspy, and unmistakably close. I whipped around, but no one was there. The whisper came again, this time from the walls. My name drawn out like a taunt. Bolted. I didn't look back. I flew down the stairs, out of the building, my mind racing. I never saw Mr. Harris again. And I never found out how long he had been watching me, or how he had disappeared without a trace. All I knew was that I could never return to that apartment. Not after what I had found inside the walls. Not after that voice.